I think that was very clear that they have.
What the fuck just happened?
More open foreign relations with as many
patriots governing Hong Kong. Experts say the root cause of Hong Kong's 2019 unrest was the absence of such a principle.
We can't let someone who will drag us off a cliff become a governor. We don't want terror and social unrest like what happened in 2019. What we need is peace, development, and prosperity. This is the essence of patriots governing Hong Kong.
2019 social unrest was the biggest governance crisis for Hong Kong since its return to China. It reminded us of the urgency needed to solve these problems. The implementation of the national security law has helped curb threats. But if Hong Kong wants to revive its economy and move on, it's crucial to keep in mind who governs.
The symposium also suggests the need to improve existing regulations and systems and to plug loopholes, especially in the city's electoral system.
Some people have made little positive contributions to Hong Kong, but won support during the elections simply by advocating against China and its central government. This means the current system doesn't match the basic principles of our country.
The symposium comes prior to the two sessions, China's major annual political meetings. Experts believe it sends a signal that China is reviewing how to better implement the one country, two systems principle in Hong Kong in order to achieve its long-term stability and prosperity.
That's He Weiwei reporting. So for more on this, let's have John Ross joining us on the line. He's a senior fellow with Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies.
It might be
For the Gambia and Guinea-Bissau, 20,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccines. That's 10% of the first batch of 200,000 doses acquired from the Chinese firm Sinopharm. Senegal plans to vaccinate all those who wish to.
Governing Hong Kong at this point.
Well, the fundamental thing which is involved is that when Hong Kong returned to China, the system that was set down was one country and two systems. Some people appear to want to suppress the first part of this and just talk about two systems. But that's not what the agreement was. Hong Kong, before the British seized it in the 1840s, had always been part of China. It had never been a separate country. And therefore it was incorporated as one country. But it's well known that amongst the leaders of the rioters over the last period were people who openly called for the independence of Hong Kong, and that's a violation of the fundamental agreement that was made. I mean, they talk about the implementation of the agreement between Britain and China, but the most fundamental part of that was not simply that there are two systems, there's one country, and they're attempting to violate it. It's very simple. It goes against everything that was agreed between China and Britain.
Governing by people who love the city or the country, this is a basic responsibility of any administration, right? Then why the rule of ensuring governance by patriots protected by the Constitution and also the basic law has not been well refined and implemented in Hong Kong yet?
That's a matter for whether it's been properly implemented or not. It's a matter for the courts and for the Chinese system to decide. That's an internal affair of China if it considers it's been implemented properly or not. But what is absolutely fundamental is that there is one country. I mean, people make quite wrong analogies. For example, sometimes they talk about some of the rioters, for example, talk about Scotland and Britain, but Scotland was a totally different, which did have a referendum on the question of independence. But Scotland was an independent country for hundreds of years. It was never militarily conquered by Britain. It voluntarily agreed to join, and what became the United Kingdom, and therefore, in theory, it could decide to leave again. But Hong Kong was not that. Hong Kong was never a country. Hong Kong was a city in China. The idea that the city can declare that it's going to be independent is going to be absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if you take my own country in London, the very, very rich parts of the centre of London might well wish to declare independence, because then they could have very, very low taxes and not transfer part of their income to other parts of the country. But it would never be acceptable. You can't have a city which decides that it's going to declare independence. So it's the fundamentals of the situation are totally clear. This is not the patriot. What we term patriotic is merely simply acknowledgement of the reality that there is one country, which is China.
Even in UK, I think people have to love the senators and the politicians. They have to love their country first, because there's a basic principle in modern elections that is called political honesty. If your oaths are not implemented, it can constitute election fraud, right?
When you can't, every member of the British Parliament has to take an oath of loyalty to the Queen. That's the law. If you don't take this oath of loyalty to the Queen, you can't take your seat. Therefore, there are people who refuse to take this. They're simple. They can't sit in the British Parliament. That's a principle. I know the situation of my country. I imagine that in pretty much every country in the world, the similar system applies. And therefore, if you want to be in China, you've got to accept the one. If you want to be in Hong Kong, you've got to accept the one country, two systems. That's the basis. That's what it all comes back to. What are the exact details of the law and so on and so forth? This is an internal affair for China. So the fundamental principle is that you cannot be in a situation in which you are attempting to separate out one city from China. It's not acceptable. It violates everything that was agreed.
Experts also call for the improvement of the city's existing regulations and systems. Have you noticed any loopholes in them, particularly in the current electoral system?
No, not that. That is very much an internal affair of Hong Kong, and this will be determined by China. This precise thing. This is decided by the National People's Congress of China. That is the agreement which was reached between Britain and China, and therefore these regulations will be decided by the National People's Congress of China. What the details of them are is a matter which it's not really for people outside the country to get into them, because they were in the agreement. They were transferred to the National People's Congress of China, so it makes it a internal affair. I don't think it would be very sensible. In fact, I think it would be completely wrong, for example, for the Chinese government to be making pronouncements on what type of electoral system Britain should have. That's Britain's affair. It's not China's affair. So the same principle applies the other way around.
Indeed. Many believe the root causes of Hong Kong's 2019 unrest was the absence of such a principle. Do you see it that way? Do you think the principle can prevent violent unrests from happening again?
Well, I think that I would have a slightly more complex view of the situation. Britain was a great expert in its empire. I mean, how come a medium-sized island ruled the biggest empire in the history of the world? It couldn't be done purely by force. Britain was great expert at divide and rule, and it tried to create a situation in Hong Kong whereby the Chinese population of Hong Kong looked up to the British and looked down on the mainland China, and this created various reactionary. They're not quite racist, because there's no ethnic difference between the people who live in Hong Kong and the people who live in mainland China. But in a situation whereby discrimination against people, for example, who speak Putonghua or Mandarin, as it's known, was very common and quite openly proclaimed within that situation. So I think you therefore have some people there who are localist, feel themselves superior to people in mainland China, don't want to be part of China despite the agreements that were made, and this causes a great deal of problem, or has done in the past. Fortunately, they collapsed because they lead the country into a dead end. There is not the slightest chance of Hong Kong leaving China. So therefore, what these people did was they got people to engage in riots, which had not the slightest chance of success. And now some people are facing the legal consequences. I hope that the distinction is made between the people responsible for the problem and some people who may inadvertently have got caught up in it.
We notice Hong Kong's economic contraction has started since the 2019 unrest and then through the pandemic. Hong Kong's economy contracted by a record of 6.1% last year. So what do you make of this economic contraction in Hong Kong? And
COVID-19 cases in the province of Hubei, with 90% of them proving effective. The method was later used in other parts of China to treat the disease. Experts say expansion of services mean there should be a larger number of qualified professionals. But there aren't enough traditional Chinese medicine practitioners to meet the national demand. Associate Professor Fang Zhuyuan from Nanjing University of Chinese Medicine says training of medical workers is urgently needed.
If we want to build a strong team of traditional Chinese medicine professionals, we need to change the training models and provide a better way for them to grow. The evaluation system also requires improvement. The government has rolled out a number of programs to support outstanding fellows and academicians. They can be very helpful.
The Chinese government recently released a set of measures to support development of traditional Chinese medicine in order to make full use of its characteristics and advantages. The measures emphasize research, especially related to taking advantage of modern technologies and Western medicine. Tang Shudong said many international research institutes study TCM with modern technologies. China should also establish national labs and clinical research centers on TCM.
There are only 2 clinical research centers on traditional Chinese medicine right now, and we also don't have large labs on basic research and the application of TCM. We need a large scientific research platform that can incorporate traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine. Such platforms can contribute to major infectious diseases and chronic diseases.
Experts are also calling for collaboration with international counterparts, including medical facilities and innovative enterprises, to facilitate clinical use. For the Beijing Hour, this is Fei Fei.
China's seeing an uptick in the job market now that the country has wrapped up its week-long Spring Festival holiday. Wenjie has more.
An increasing number of people are flowing into the job market following the end of the Spring Festival holiday. Hundreds of thousands of people are either returning to their work or have begun to look for a new job.
I'm planning to find a job in a design company in Yangjiang City and work in the field of product design and research and development.
We need a lot of nannies after the Spring Festival holiday.
Right, I bet.
Heading into positive relations after month-long border standoff. To talk more about this, in the studio, we're joined by Liu Kun, our political commentator and a former correspondent in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us, Liu Kun. Good to be here. So what kind of signal is the Chinese Foreign Ministry trying to send over to India, in your opinion?
Well, I think certainly this is very positive news in the development of bilateral ties between the two countries. One thing I think the Chinese are trying to say is that the two sides should move beyond recent border clashes and work to improve the overall relationship. Another thing is that China wants to stress that China and India's interests are in line with each other in many regional and international issues. As you mentioned, as you have said, one being said, China attaches great importance for the BRICS mechanism, and BRICS is a body of for emerging markets and developing countries, and it is now a mechanism of global influence. China and India are both developing countries, have large population, and people's livelihood need improvement. So that's one of the reasons why the two worked on establishing the BRICS mechanism in the first place. And the first president of the new development bank of the BRICS group is from India. The two have very similar appeals in maintaining, the development of the Asia Pacific. I'm glad to see that I think the Indian major media outlets in India have picked up the message and reported about the story.
Both Chinese and Indian defense authorities reviewed last week. The two are moving back their forces in the Bangun Lake area. How important is this step in de-escalating the tensions between the two? Is it way too early to expect tangible results in negotiations of border issues between the two?
Yes, it is way too early to expect that. But I think de-escalating is very important because it is the basis for actual negotiation and it's the basis for both sides to return to the table. In the 2019 meeting with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Chinese President Xi Jinping specifically mentioned his proposals for resolving the border disputes. He said the two sides should seek solution that's fair, reasonable, and acceptable to both. And he said for issues that are in the core interest of each other, both sides should manage very cautiously. And for issues that you cannot resolve overnight or in a short period of time, both sides should deal with very carefully. Border disputes are long-time hard issues and cannot be expected to be solved over not only overnight, but maybe within a generation. But it's important to maintain relative stability on the ground and return to the negotiating table.
You know, China is India's biggest trading partner, and we saw that India relies heavily on Chinese-made heavy machinery, telecom equipment, and home appliances. So how do you interpret the structure of this trade relationship?
I think overall it's quite imbalanced. We can take a look at what goods and services the two are actually selling to each other. What India is selling to China are largely raw materials such as minerals, cotton materials, and so on. And what China is selling to India is what you have mentioned, you know, like machinery and telecom equipment. The total imports from China to India in 2020 was actually 58.7 billion US dollars, which was more than India's combined purchases from the US and UAE. And US is India's second largest trading partner. UAE is third largest. So I think that's one of the reasons why domestically Indians are debating about, you know, moving away from this heavy reliance on Chinese manufacturing and establish self-reliance.
Reuters reported a few days ago that India will clear some new investment proposals from China as tensions ease between the two. So how important are Chinese investments in India?
So from the reports from Reuters said that India will move to clear, you know, these restrictions. And the companies mentioned include Chinese auto company Great Wall Motors acquisition of General Motors plant in India, and also investment from Shanghai Automotive Industry Corporation. Well, at the height, we have to go back a few months to remember that at the height of the tensions between the two, India you know, framed different policies targeting specifically in China, including, you know, blocking China from participating in government tenders and banning Chinese apps such as WeChat and TikTok. The problem is Chinese investments are the main investment in India in the area of tech and also digital economy. Reports show that every 18 in 30 unicorn companies in India are invested by the Chinese. And Chinese have invested around $4 billion in Indian startups. So the tech industries of the two countries are highly linked. So India move to clear the investment restrictions are certainly good news. But one thing I think we have to remember is that Indians will clear investments in area where they consider not sensitive, you know, such as manufacturing industry. For internet technologies, they still think that these are rather sensitive and will be hard for Chinese companies to return to previous levels of investment.
We've been talking about the China-India border disputes since last summer. So how crucial is it, you know, the border issue in the overall bilateral relations between the two countries?
The border disputes are important, I think, but I definitely don't think it should be the overarching issue between the two. As I mentioned earlier, combined together, India and Chinese population will be 3 billion. and the world is only at 7.8 billion. So economic development is at the central task for both, the Chinese and Indian government, and the two have similar concerns when it comes to issues such as global governance, giving developing nations more influence and power in international organizations and affairs and so on. So disputes shouldn't be the overarching issue, and the two should work on the more important issues.
We know India prides itself on its long-time tradition of non-alignment policy, but there have been some analysis saying India is increasingly moving away from this tradition by teaming up with America to contain China in recent years, especially in defense area. Is that so?
Domestically, it is an issue that's being debated in India too, and there have been, criticism of the Narendra Modi government of moving closer to the United States and moving away from this non-alignment tradition. I think India chooses not to align, but certainly it can make alliance on specific issues such as, military and also defense. There are many reasons why, India is moving away from this non-alignment policies. Domestic politics is one of the reasons because of rising nationalism, which is not only a problem in India, but also in many other countries as well. And India also aims to push for its bigger role in international affairs. Narendra Modi specifically mentioned about, India moving away from a balancing power to a leading power, in international affairs. And I think somehow the U.S. containment of China, specifically in the Asia-Pacific region, provides, I think, opportunities for the Indians to benefit. And certainly there are, the disputes between India and China. There are so many of them, China is working on the Belt and Road Initiative, but India considers, South Asia to be its sphere of influence, and certainly does not want to see Chinese investment and projects expanding in that area. Like Pakistan, and also China's attitude in UN reform and UN affairs, and also China's approach in the nuclear non-proliferation issue is something that India considers one of the biggest hurdles for it to realize the dream of becoming, a leading power. But I think India should realize that it is not in its own interest to join U.S. in this all-out, confrontation approach, with China.
Okay, thank you very much, Liu Kun. That's Liu Kun, our political commentator and a former correspondent in Washington, D.C. Coming up, China's top diplomat stresses China's human rights philosophy at the UN Human Rights Council. So to listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. And for further discussion, you can follow us on Twitter. It's China Plus News. This is World Today. We'll be back in a minute.
Hello, this is Michael Zhang. Greetings from Los Angeles of the Golden
Listed 4 priority areas for fighting climate change. Shane Bigham with you. Stay with us here on the Beijing Hour.
Join the most popular Chinese language learning page on Facebook by searching for CRI Learn Chinese. It's a quick yet fun way to achieve your language goals. Start your free lessons now with unlimited videos, photos, and text tutorials on expressions and Chinese culture. CRI Learn Chinese Facebook page. The world opens with 您好.
The
Beijing Hour. The Beijing Hour.
The Beijing Hour brings you an hour of comprehensive news and information from both China and the rest of the world. A mix of news, sports, and entertainment. In-depth analysis of the day's big stories, as well as the most comprehensive business of the day. The Beijing Hour, your very own window to China and the rest of the world. Want to know what's trending in China? China Plus News Facebook page helps you to discover the real China, from the latest news to quirky Chinese inventions, videos, photos, live streaming, and more. Join in the conversation today by searching for China Plus News on Facebook and discover its news, its people, its traditions and culture. China Plus News Facebook page. Open your eyes to the real China.
Examining the events that impact and shape China and the rest of the world. This is the Beijing Hour, 1 hour of news and information brought to you every weekday. Now here's your host,
Shane Bagel with you on this Wednesday morning. Still to come in business. China is again Germany's largest trading partner. In sports, golfer Tiger Woods has been injured in a car crash. In culture and entertainment, an agreement between Chinese and South Korean broadcasters. There are a number of ways to contact us. You can talk to us on Twitter at China Plus News or log on to Facebook China Plus News for more news, videos, and analysis. Now today's headlines. Chinese President Xi Jinping will attend a gathering in Beijing on Thursday to mark the country's accomplishments in poverty eradication. The Chinese leader will present awards and certificates to national honorary title recipients for their contributions to the poverty alleviation cause. He'll also deliver a speech. The event will be broadcast live by China Media Group. The National Museum of China says it'll exhibit the lunar samples brought back by the Chang'e 5 probe. The samples have arrived at the museum and the exhibition is under preparation. The return capsule of the Chang'e 5 probe landed on December the 17th, retrieving more than 1,700 grams of lunar samples. China is providing free vaccine aid to more than 50 countries around the world. Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin says a number of countries, including Pakistan, Cambodia, Laos, and Belarus, have received vaccine donated by China.
Most of these countries are developing countries. We hope more capable countries to join hands to make positive contributions to supporting and assisting the international community, developing countries in particular, in the fight against the pandemic.
Wang says China is also exporting vaccines to 27 countries that are willing to buy Chinese vaccines. The Chinese vaccines exported to countries such as Serbia, Hungary, Peru, and Chile have already arrived at their destinations. An Australian scientist on the World Health Organization mission team in China says it's extremely unlikely that the novel coronavirus escaped from a lab. Dominic Dwyer and other scientists on the WHO mission arrived in Wuhan on January the 14th. Dwyer says the Wuhan Institute of Virology is an impressive research facility and looks to be run well with due regard to staff health. The professor from the University of Sydney also says that he's learned that blood samples of scientists are routinely taken and stored, and no evidence of antibodies to the coronavirus have been found. Along with Chinese scientists and experts, the WHO mission team has conducted field trips to several venues across that central Chinese city, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The UN chief has listed 4 priority areas to address the risks that climate change poses to peace and security, including a greater focus on prevention through ambitious climate action. Antonio Guterres made the call during a Security Council open debate on climate and security. The top UN official emphasized the need to protect countries, communities, and people from increasingly frequent and severe climate impacts. He also called for embracing people-oriented security concepts and deepening partnerships across and beyond the United Nations system. World leaders have come together to discuss plans for recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen advocated for a global campaign to overcome the pandemic.
Let's overcome the pandemic with a global vaccination campaign. Let's stop the hunger crisis, bring children back to their classrooms, fight rising inequalities, and engage in a green recovery, treating our planet with care and respect.
The panel discussion was hosted by the international advocacy organization Global Citizen, the European Commission, and the World Health Organization. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa voiced his support for calls for rich countries to donate 5% of their vaccines to poor countries.
No person, no country, and no region must be left behind. To fight the pandemic, we need to pool all our resources, our capabilities, our knowledge, and intellectual property. That is why we continue to call on world leaders to support the COVAX facility to ensure rapid and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines for all countries.
The panel of world leaders also discussed other major global issues, including world hunger, climate change, and international aid. Ukraine's expected to start rolling out COVID-19 vaccines, with medical workers first in line to receive the shot. Deputy Health Minister Viktor Lashko says doses begin arriving in Kiev on Tuesday and will be distributed around the country to start the campaign today.
Вакцинація розпочинається після доставлення вакцини.
Vaccination will start right after the vaccine deployment. The vaccine will arrive at the storage centers. Mobile groups will pick up the vaccine there and move to hospitals which deal with the COVID-19. According to the immunization campaign, medical workers who treat COVID-19 patients will get the vaccine first.
The number of coronavirus cases in the west of the country has risen sharply since the end of a 2-week quarantine in January. The government has set up mobile hospitals in western Ukraine to come up with following a dramatic rise in morbidity. This is Shane Bigham, live from the Chinese capital. Coming up in business, impressive trade numbers between China and Germany.
Want more in-depth reports and behind-the-scenes stories from the Beijing Hour? Follow us on Twitter at the Beijing Hour, on Facebook at the Beijing Hour Official.
We're at 36 minutes past the hour now. Turning to business, and we'll start with a look at the markets. U.S. stocks finished mixed on Tuesday as investors digested the testimony of Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell on the economic outlook. Powell says the U.S. recovery remains uneven and far from complete, and the path ahead is highly uncertain. The Fed chief says ongoing vaccinations offer hope for a return to more normal conditions later this year. These remarks came as inflation fears have mounted on Wall Street. Tech megacaps that fueled the market's first bounce from pandemic lows have seen intense selling recently amid inflation worries. Both the Dow and the S&P 500 are up by 0.1%. The NASDAQ fell 0.5%. European markets finished mixed as of the most recent closing prices. The CAC 40 in France gained 0.2%. The FTSE 100 in London is up by 0.1%. The DAX in Germany lost 0.6%. Stocks on the Chinese mainland closed lower on Tuesday, with the Shanghai Composite Index down by nearly 0.2%. Market analyst Timothy Pope has more.
Chinese onshore market staged a pretty spirited rally during mid-morning and early afternoon here, but in the last hour of trade, it all seemed to fall apart, really. Investors backed off from their gains. The Shanghai Composite Index closed about 0.2% lower, and the CSI 300 was down by 1/3% at the end of the day. The small cap and tech-heavy Chinext board didn't really see the same kind of intraday gain, so it was down by about 0.8% at the close. Investors still a bit more cautious about small caps. Investors look to be buying the dip on high-priced liquor stocks, though they've spent the last few sessions falling. Guizhou Multi rose about 0.8% today, but it is still down more than 10% from its high point in the middle of last week. China's 3 major airlines were helping give some lift to the indexes as well. Air China up 4.7%, China Eastern up 2%, and China's Southern Airlines rather up 3.2%. Those gains mirroring some global optimism over the possibility of some increased international travel. In the region, of course, there are expectations that travel restrictions in place for Taiwan and Macau will also come down. And we had continued gains for stocks linked to copper mining as well. Jiangxi Copper continuing its run of gains for a third day.
That was market analyst Timothy Pope. Hong Kong stocks finished higher. The Hang Seng Index gained 1%. Elsewhere in Asia, Singapore stocks closed higher yesterday, with the Straits Times Index going up over 0.3%. Japanese markets were closed on Tuesday. China has remained Germany's biggest trading partner each year since 2015. Germany's foreign trade turnover with China last year increased by 3% compared to 2019, with goods worth over 210 billion euros, more than 250 billion US dollars traded between the two countries. Goods worth over 110 billion euros were imported from China to Germany in 2020, up 5.6% year on year. German exports to China last year dropped by 0.1% to nearly 96 billion euros, ranking second only to exports to the United States, which has remained Germany's largest export market over those past 5 years. But China expanded its position as the German electrical industry's biggest export market in 2020, with exports growing 6.5% to 23 billion euros. With more on this, Ding Hung spoke to John Ross, senior fellow at the Chungyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University.
What do you think are the factors that have contributed to this stable trade relationship?
Well, because the situation, Germany and China are two of the most complementary economies in the world, because China is absolutely dominant in medium and what we might call lower level high technology industry. Germany is one of the most advanced economies in the world, particularly in engineering and manufacturing, and therefore they have a very, very good situation. Germany exports basically high-end technology machine tools to China. China uses those high-end machine tools to produce very good value consumer goods, which are then sold back to Germany. So the situation is extremely complementary. And then, of course, this is in a context whereby the EU is becoming more, it's the first time the EU has now done more trade with China than the United States. So therefore, there's both a good overall situation and a very good fit between the two economies.
So one phenomenon we have noticed is that China has become the biggest export market for the German electrical sector, but it is still not the biggest one for the overall trade. So what kind of approaches do you think can be taken or should be taken to bridge this gap?
Well, it would depend above all on the expansion of China's overall economy. You can't really, with such a large economy as China and Germany, it's not really a very big economy itself, but it's an even bigger exporter. You can't artificially develop sectors between the two. I mean, Germany is traditionally very advanced in certain fields such as electronics, it's very advanced in chemicals and so on, and therefore it really will depend upon the relative growth of China's economy and of the German economy. It will depend on overall economic conditions. That's what is most important to them in the trade.
What is your expectations for the future development in this regard? You talk about one key issue will be the growth of the Chinese economy, but in addition to this issue, what else do you think will be key here?
Whether Germany stays on a very sensible political course. Germany has refused to go along with the types of tariffs and other sort of trade war issues which the United States wanted with China, and Germany has benefited greatly as a result of this. If there continues to be political stability between the two countries, then I don't really see any big economic problems. I think that both will, within Europe, Germany will recover faster than most economies, and China is the most rapidly growing major economy in the world. So I really think the only thing that really can get in the way of favourable trade relations would be some negative political development in Germany. Chancellor Merkel has been very insistent on maintaining good relations with China, but of course she's going to retire in about a year, so one would have to hope that her successor continues the same very rational policies.
That was John Ross, senior fellow at the Chungyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University, talking about trade between China and Germany. Dozens of Boeing 777 aircraft have been grounded in several countries after a United Airlines plane suffered an engine blast and scattered debris on the weekend. Owen Fairclough has more.
The government of the United Kingdom is the latest to take action in the wake of this near disaster involving a Boeing 777, banning all 777s using the engine at the centre of this incident from entering UK airspace. This was the engine that exploded as a United Airlines Boeing 777 took off from Denver, Colorado over the weekend. The Japanese government has also grounded all Boeing 777s using that particular engine made by Pratt & Whitney. And as other governments and authorities around the world ponder what to do in the wake of this latest incident involving Boeing aircraft, more testimony has been emerging from passengers inside the aircraft at the moment when one of the engines exploded.
All of a sudden, it was just this big, you could just feel it like boom, and you could hear it, and we started shaking.
So that was the picture from inside the aircraft, but it's also remarkable that this plane scattered debris over residential suburbs outside of Denver in Colorado, and authorities there are stunned that so far no one appears to have been injured.
This park, on a day like today when it's not as cold as it was last weekend, we could have hundreds of people here. And the fact that we are still not getting reports of any injuries is absolutely shocking at this point. It's amazing.
And the 777 at the center of this latest incident is also at the center of another inquiry involving a Boeing 747 cargo plane using the same engine involved in the incident over the weekend. In this incident, pieces of that engine were scattered over a Dutch town in which one woman suffered minor injuries. United Airlines is the only U.S. carrier here using that 777 plane with that particular engine. There are a total of 69 of them in service and another 59 currently in storage. And this is this engine made by Pratt & Whitney is being used on predominantly older planes, which are gradually being phased out to be replaced by newer, more fuel-efficient models. For example, Japan Airlines has 13 of these 777s with that particular engine and is due to retire all of them in 2022. But having suffered billions of dollars in losses due to the 737 MAX incidents and the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, the last thing Boeing needs right now is another near disaster.
That was Owen Fairclough reporting on the suspension of operations of Boeing 777 aircraft in several countries after a plane suffered an engine failure. You're listening to the Beijing Hour. Coming up in sports, golfer Tiger Woods has been injured in a car crash.
Find the Beijing Hour on social media. Talk to us on Twitter at the Beijing Hour or on Facebook at the Beijing Hour Official.
It's 47 past the hour. Now turning to sports, and here's Youngwoo.
Golf star Tiger Woods suffered leg injuries in a vehicle rollover in Los Angeles and is undergoing.
Los Angeles. Am I supposed to feel bad for that?
I think also recognizes the Biden administration recognizes the importance of this. American physical infrastructure is crumbling. This is a big problem. Look at the Texas power outage, for example. So this was a problem of physical infrastructure, but it was also a problem of soft infrastructure, letting the market take too big of a role and that becoming a disaster when more extreme events occur. So I think the Biden administration recognizes these challenges in the longer term plan. The second step, as you mentioned, of this two-step plan is to address some of these structural issues. But the urgent issue is solving the challenges posed by COVID.
Mm-hmm. And this is to stimulate the economy. But U.S. Senator Shelley Moore Capito said, quote unquote, as the amount of money we have spent increase, we must realize the fiscal burdens we are adding to the future generations. So are you worried about it?
Well, I think certainly many economists, many investments, research analysts do see this as a source of potential concern. Again, I go back to my earlier point that all of these are connected in that if the government has a very large, perhaps we could say very generous stimulus package, that money has to come from somewhere. Now, it either comes from taxes, it comes from government borrowing, or it comes from the printing press. And all of those can pose long-term dangers to the sustained prosperity, even the sustained viability of the U.S. economy.
And when we talk about the U.S. economy, we have to mention the U.S. stock market. So, Andy, what factors do you think have supported its solid performance since last year, and will it continue? I ask you this because we've seen that the U.S. tech stocks fell sharply this week on nerves over inflation outlook, and it seems that everyone rushed to get more and more tech, and they've gotten pretty high, right?
Yes. So again, I think this goes back to a fundamental challenge facing the U.S. economy is that it is a K-shaped recovery, in that there are a number of businesses, a number of individuals that have done very well because of the pandemic. And of course, a large number have suffered. So some have done well, some have suffered, and this accounts for this idea of a K-shaped recovery. Then we look at the very, very loose monetary policy by the Fed that creates a lot of liquidity. So when we have low interest rates, there's no alternative. They call it TINA. There is no alternative to the stock market.
That's Andy Mock, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. A court in Beijing has ordered a man to pay a full-time housewife 50,000 yuan in compensation as the couple gets ready for divorce. In the meantime, the woman will receive her share of the family property after it's divided. This is the first ruling of its kind after China's new civil code took effect in January. So to talk more about this, joining us now in the studio is my colleague Ding He. Thanks for joining us, Ding He.
Good evening.
So this divorce case in Beijing has drawn a lot of attention on Chinese social media. First of all, tell us more about the case.
So we're talking about a couple here in Beijing. They got married in 2015 and they have a child. Problems began to appear in 2018, and since 2019, this husband has been seeking to divorce. Anyway, this court in Beijing has finally, approved their divorce this time. Their child will live with their mother following the divorce, and this father will need to pay 2,000 yuan per month to help raise this child in the future. Their family assets will be divided evenly between these two people. However, one complaint from this woman is that she has always been serving as a full-time housewife in this marriage, and this man has rarely taken care of any family-related affairs like taking care of the baby, cleaning and cooking, etc. So she demanded a compensation of 160,000 yuan for her time and energy invested into this family. And like you said, this court is now ordering a compensation of 50,000 yuan.
Then what's the role played by the China's civil code in the ruling of this case?
So a key issue here is really whether this full-time housewife should get compensation as she demanded, because those people who are against this idea may argue that she is already getting her share of the divided family asset. Now, regarding this ruling by the court, the explanation from the judge of this case is that the division of family assets mainly targets those tangible assets like money and other kind of properties. However, when all the housework is undertaken by this wife, by this woman, it is actually potentially helping her husband gain some kind of intangible assets. For example, when this guy can focus entirely on his work, he has a greater chance to improve his work-related skills, and that in return will increase his income in the future. So this is the argument from the judge. And asking for compensation for your investment and input into this family was theoretically possible under China's previous marriage law, but only theoretically, frankly speaking. Now the marriage law has become history here in China, and it has been replaced by the wider-reaching civil code. Like you said, the civil code has basically made it even clearer than before that this kind of compensation we talk about should be allowed. And now the legal principle is over there, and based on this principle, that's why we are seeing this latest ruling from this court in Beijing.
One question raised by many social media users that whether a compensation of 50,000 yuan is too little for this woman. Because in China's first-tier city like Beijing or Shanghai, the wage level for nannies is pretty high. So 50,000 yuan is only like 2 or 3 months of income for an about same level nanny in Beijing, right? What's your take on that?
Oh, exactly. I certainly take this point from these people. Indeed, 50,000 yuan is a very small amount in Beijing, but I think given the fact that the court only orders this father to pay 2,000 yuan a month to help raise his child in the future, this guy probably, I mean, that's a possibility that this guy probably does not have too much money. Again, like I said earlier, the legal basis for asking for compensation is now there, but how much money a person will needs to pay, this is really depends on his or her capability to make money and her long-term financial sustainability. And I think another point I want to make is actually, like you said, I noticed many people are now talking about this nanny issue. It's probably a little misleading because nanny is nanny, housewife is housewife. The goal of nanny is to make money, right? But for a housewife, her primary goal does not seem to be making money from taking care of the family affairs. So we need to have some kind of distinction here.
So let's talk about stay-home moms. From the bigger picture, it seems there's no official data regarding the size of this group in China. But what's their role in Chinese economy and society?
Yes, like I said, there is really no official figure in this regard, but probably the figures from the World Bank is something we can take a look at. In 1990, 79% of the Chinese female aged above 15 years old were working. By 2020, this ratio had dropped to 60. One possible explanation behind this drop can be there are nowadays more full-time housewives now than the situation 30 years ago, because more Chinese families nowadays can afford to have only one breadwinner. But anyway, Chinese women's participation in the labor market is actually much higher than countries like Japan, the United States, and Germany. I think Chinese housewives actually have their unique contribution economically and socially, that's for sure.
Thanks, Ding Heng. That's our reporter, Ding Heng. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. I'm Glenna. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello everyone, this is Zoon Ahmed Khan, journalist from Pakistan, currently based in Tsinghua University. World Today is an excellent initiative to discuss current affairs by including experts from across the globe.
Award-winning service at competitive prices. Visit ecochoicewindow.ca.
And Markham, mostly overcast and 4 degrees. Mostly cloudy in Brampton and 4 degrees Oakville. And Mississauga cloudy. 4 Hamilton, mainly clear. And 5 degrees. Downtown's a little cloudy. At 5 degrees, we're going down to
Buying a new or newer car? Then consider donating your old one to KCRW. You'll be supporting a unique public radio station and getting a nice tax write-off to boot. For details, visit kcrw.com/cars.
I'm Sultana Timmons. Here are the top stories right now.
All believe that the plan met its threat and that we were prepared. We now know that we had the wrong plan.
The Senate panel tries to figure out how security officials were caught so off guard at the Capitol Hill riot last month.
It's Tuesday, February 23rd, and this is
What's being called
up.
I'm Ari Shapiro.
Coming up, a closer look at intelligence failures that led to the January 6th insurrection.
Also, cities try to use less natural gas and the industry fights back.
That was one of our strategies. Could we say no natural gas in new construction?
Later, we ask artists what they would like to see in a future memorial to victims of COVID-19.
I would hope that some memorial kind of teaches people that the next time around we need to do this differently.
And a confirmation hearing for a woman who could become the first Native American cabinet official.
That's ahead. First News.
Live from NPR News, I'm Jack Spear. The chair of the board of directors for the group that operates the Texas electric grid has announced his resignation, along with 3 others. As Mose Bushell reports from member station KUT in Austin, the announcement comes after a blackout that left millions without power in Texas last week during a winter storm.
The 4 members who plan to resign all live outside of Texas, a fact that they acknowledge has become a concern in a letter to the rest of the board. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he welcomes the resignations, adding there was a lack of transparency and preparedness at the Electric Reliability Council, or ERCOT. The group has become the focus of public anger in the wake of the blackouts. At one point, the names of board members were removed from the ERCOT website because they were receiving threats. But many analysts point out that the group has no real regulatory power and suggest it's become a scapegoat as officials look for someone to blame. I'm Mose Bushell in Austin.
Golfer Tiger Woods was hurt today in what officials say was a single vehicle rollover accident in California. According to his manager, the crash happened about 20 miles south of Los Angeles shortly after 7 a.m. local time. Los Angeles County Fire Chief Darrell Osby says the 45-year-old Woods was responsive when he was removed from the vehicle.
It was brought to my attention that he was conscious. Now, exactly what was said is unknown, but he was conscious.
Woods was undergoing surgery for what was described as major leg injuries. No other vehicles were involved. Woods has won 15 major championships on the PGA Tour, last playing in December in the PNC Championship in Orlando with his son Charlie, who's 12 years old. The Senate has voted 78-20 to confirm Linda Thomas Greenfield as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She is a veteran diplomat and now a member of President Biden's cabinet. Here's NPR's Michelle Kellerman.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says Linda Thomas Greenfield has a big job ahead.
She will have no time to waste in rebuilding America's reputation and reasserting the first instrument of American power, diplomacy.
Thomas Greenfield spent 35 years in the Foreign Service before she was forced into retirement in the Trump administration. An African American from Louisiana, she says she often connects with people through, as she puts it, gumbo diplomacy. She begins her job at the UN as the U.S. prepares to take over the month-long presidency of the Security Council in March. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
The Senate hearing looking at the events leading up to the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol wrapped up today with testimony from security officials who described confusion during the attack and intelligence failures. Senate Rules Committee Chairwoman Amy Klobuchar says it's clear action needs to be taken. 3 of the 4 security officials, including the Capitol Police Chief, resigned immediately after that attack. On Wall Street today, the Dow was up 15 points, the NASDAQ down 67. This is NPR. A massive oil spill in Israeli waters off the Mediterranean Sea last week has washed up onto Lebanon's southern coast, threatening critical wildlife. Nada Homsi has more.
Signs of the mysterious oil spill near Israel's shore began showing up on Lebanon's coast Monday. Sticky globs of black tar deposits have washed in, covering beaches in the southern city of Tyre, home to one of the country's wildlife sanctuaries. The magnitude of the damage caused by the spill remains unknown. Lebanon's Ministry of Environment says it is conducting an assessment of the oil spill's impact on the country. In Al Mansouriya Beach in Tyre, the coast is lined with tar, according to Mona Khalil, who heads one of the only sanctuaries for Lebanon's endangered sea turtles. Nesting season will soon begin for the turtles, but a tar-lined beach will present a danger to their lives. For NPR News, I'm Nada Homsi in Beirut.
A federal judge is ordering the wife of Mexican drug kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman to remain temporarily jailed after she was arrested and accused of helping her husband run his multi-billion-dollar cartel. 31-year-old Emma Coronel Espuro, a former teen beauty queen who was Guzman's 3rd or 4th wife, is also accused of plotting his audacious escape from a Mexican prison in 2015. The Justice Department says Coronel Espuro, a dual citizen of the U.S. and Mexico, was arrested at Dulles International Airport yesterday. Cornell is the mother of the couple's school-aged twin daughters. Her husband was sentenced to life behind bars in 2019. Crude oil futures slipped today, oil down 3 cents a barrel to settle at $61.67 a barrel in New York. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments, wealth management from dedicated advisors that tailor portfolios to each client's unique goals. More at FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss.
In most of the province, for months, an emergency order encouraging Ontarians to work from home,
95% of these
customers
are
to keep the lights
substantial
on.
land masses on China's continental shelf. The remainder are newer formations created by volcanic activity. The buildup of sediment brought by rivers and coral islands. Deep below the surface of the sea lies a hidden world, one created by the ceaseless struggle between ocean and land, the world of the hydrothermal vents. Here, between the fragile cracks that separate the tectonic plates that have shaped the world's continents, molten lava is constantly spurting to the surface. But this fantastic undersea world is a hostile environment, shaped by hydrothermal plumes full of toxic sulfides. It's hard to see how anything can survive here. Yet somehow living organisms do make a home in this living hell. In crevices just meters away from hydrothermal vents, spouting superheated water, tiny grapsoid crabs have made a home. How do they thrive in this challenging environment? Ocean currents are one reason, lowering the temperature of the water to a comfortable 22 degrees. What's more, toxins rising from the vents kill organisms unaccustomed to this harsh world. The result is a ceaseless snowfall of dead organisms, a free feast for these denizens of the hydrothermal deep. Just goes to show, even cruel nature sometimes gives someone a free lunch. This is Guishan Island to the east of Taiwan. It's a reminder of the ever-changing relationship between land and sea. It formed 7,000 years ago. A volcano emerged from the depths of the sea. "18,000 years ago, this part of the sea was in fact dry land. Shuadao Island wasn't an island then. Back then, it was a mountain. But time changes everything. Eventually, the sea covered everything, all except the peak of that mountain, Shuadao Island. The size of 140 soccer fields. On Shuidao Island, one species is king. The pit viper. In its age-long separation from the mainland, the island has developed a distinct ecosystem. A female snake is about to give birth. The most important thing now is to find a safe place to give birth. That's because the pit vipers have a rival for rulership of this island, the brown rat. The ancestors of these rodents were brought here long ago on ships. Luckily, the snakes have a secret weapon in their armory, a facial pit that enables them to detect minuscule changes in temperature. Forewarned of the furry threat to her newborn babies, the female viper goes into action. Quickly, the hunter becomes the hunted. In a few minutes, the brown rat will be dead. Alert lifted. Now the expectant mother can give birth in relative safety. But this snake is lucky. Food is scarce on the island, so the reproduction rate is very low. Annually, 1 in 4 of the female snakes gives birth. These pit vipers are ovoviviparous, which means they hatch their eggs inside their bodies, directly giving birth to their baby snakes. Mating takes place from July to September, with females giving birth the following year. Only after hibernation do the fertilized eggs inside the bodies of the females have enough energy to develop. Even then, the infant snakes still have to wait until September or October before they see the light of day. When the miracle moment does come around, however, these female vipers will give birth to as many as 8 snakes at a time. Thanks to ovoviviparity, the fertility rate of these vipers is greatly enhanced. "20 minutes later, another little snake is on its way. The baby snake needs to break free from the afterbirth.
What lice the snake?
4 hours later, this female has welcomed a brood of 5 snakes to the world. Almost as soon as they're born, they slither away. The mother who went to such pains to bring them into the world isn't destined to raise them.
Well, that's not true.
Weak and fragile after the trauma of giving birth, food is now what she most needs. But for now, All she can do is wait. Life isn't easy on an isolated island where food is scarce.
Snakes, rats.
Over time, the rigors of existence here have driven most other species to extinction.
Wow, living somewhere else.
It's thanks to their exceptional resilience that these cold-blooded animals have managed to cling on here.
You could have told us.
Though islands like these offer limited prospects to permanent residents, they have their uses for seasonal visitors. Shurdao Island is a handy pit stop for migratory birds making their way south. For 2 months of the year, hundreds of thousands of them make the island their temporary home. Good news for the hungry snakes.
This could get interesting.
So, between September and November, it's hunting season for the island's 20,000 vipers. Having not eaten for almost half a year, they make a scramble for a place to take advantage of this seasonal flying feast, the treetops. Experience as well as instinct has honed the athletic skills they need to hunt their winged prey. If this is war for survival, you might think the airborne birds have the advantage.
Yeah, they gotta come down sooner or later.
But thanks to their heat sensors, the vipers are able to launch precision ground-to-air assaults. They only have to get lucky once. A single bird can meet the energy needs of a pit viper for a whole year. The tussle between island and ocean is never ending. The organisms that depend on them constantly adapting and evolving. To the south of the Pearl River estuary, there's a scattering of islands. These are in fact the peaks of a mountain range that extends into the ocean. White-bellied sea eagles build their nests in high trees on the cliffs. The nests have a diameter of 2 meters. This nestling is about 40 days old.
2 meters. How big are these motherfuckers?
A white-bellied sea eagle is patrolling the territory.
Oh, we heard this part of this one. Okay, we heard this one all out of order. Okay.
Have you ever thought about owning physical gold or silver and been told it's a bad idea? Thank goodness for Guildhall. Guildhall Precious Metals will put you first. With Guildhall, you can discover how owning physical gold and silver could protect your finances.
I hear somebody say China
At hiscox.com. Hiscox, the business insurance experts.
What?
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. How do we remember more than 500,000 people in this country who have died of COVID-19? Artists have already begun creating answers to that question. Poets, muralists, and architects all have...
some sort of dedication to monitor the kid or whatnot, because I used to play the piano. I mean, there's something that's really great about picking up a musical instrument. One thing is with every music instrument now when I think about it, it requires you to coordinate both hands, sometimes other parts of the body too.
Well, it's too late for me to turn back.
It was a rainy day when Pizzaville realised we all have things we should cut back on. For me half-brother Ray Hall, that's ordering inflated...
That was a very specific memorial to transit workers in one city who died of the coronavirus. And so I asked Tracy K. Smith what qualities she wants to see in a pandemic memorial that has a broader mission. And she told me it needs to invite people to bridge a divide, to answer a question, complete a sentence.
It feels good to me to look at something like the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and realize that there's a lot.
Radio.
7:22 on this busy Tuesday. Lots going on, so let's get to it with our Global Talkers. We got Scott Thompson, who is with our sister station Hamilton Global News Radio 900 AM, 900 CHML. I got like a real blank brain block with that one, Scott. I've been there for what, 25 years?
It's called COVID fog, don't worry.
Oh, tell me about it, or lack of sanity. Noon until 3, and of course, Mike Stubbs, voice of the London Knights, host of London Live on Global News London. Afternoons 1 till 3. Hello, guys, both of you.
Hey, Alec. Great to be here.
Big story, obviously, certainly, probably for you guys, because you're big golf watchers. Tiger Woods back in the news again. He survived a single-car crash late, that came out late today, but happened actually quite early this morning, and suffered pretty serious leg injuries, a compound fracture in one leg, a shattered ankle in another. And here were the sheriffs just updating the situation.
He was alive and he was conscious, and that's the extent of that.
And who gave him a license?
There was no evidence of impairment, so subsequent to that, we're not going to make any, there was no effort to draw blood, for example, at the hospital.
Oh, there's blood
So
everywhere.
that's the update. I found it a little odd. I mean, this is a guy who just had his 5th back surgery in December, so he's been plagued by injuries. He was fully expecting Mike to play in the Masters in a few weeks. He wanted to anyway.
The larvae of a species of sesarmid crab is the food of choice for these frogs, hence their name, crab-eating frogs. Poor vision is the biggest disadvantage these frogs have. But even if they manage to spot their prey, their success rate is low.
What's that? This makes me feel better about life because this whole island is just fucking animals eating each other. Unless they get eaten by something else first.
The crab is targeted. But all it has to do to escape is to bide its time.
And sit still. Yeah, we heard this one. Damn.
It's funny that you brought that up, Alex, because that's exactly what I thought. I was watching the same news conference, and my first reaction was, why would you not draw blood? Simply because it is a single vehicle accident for one reason, and number two, as you mentioned, there's been issues there with prescription drugs and such. You know, I guess perhaps he didn't seem impaired, but I'm good. You know, I'm guessing 2 broken legs or whatever the extent of those injuries were. How do you know? I mean, that's exactly why you draw blood. So yeah, I found that very surprising as well, Alex, that they didn't do that. Another thing I thought was surprising was how long it took for this story to actually get out.
Yes.
It happened 7 o'clock on the West Coast, so still that would break late morning here. So it's kind of surprising we're just sort of hearing about it late afternoon. But obviously, as soon as you hear about the story and see the actual images, you immediately go back to those days way back when, and we all know the story and what happened with him and his wife and such. So again, there is a lot of backstory here. So it is very surprising.
Vast patchwork of more than 50,000 brightly colored panels made by people to remember loved ones who died in the AIDS crisis. At one point,
Moi, j'ai mis au studio quand on travaillait, par exemple, il avait toujours des producteurs, il comprenait comment amener une chanson à son apogée pour qu'elle soit vraiment efficace et tout. Vraiment, moi, je trouve que c'est une perte énorme pour tout le monde. Et moi, tu vois, je m'attendais.
Now I'm no longer alone.
The importance of that.
Well, I think it was certainly important to us at the time. We needed that to the voices. Each panel may represent a life, but it really represents the relationship between that person and the person or group making it. And we wanted to tell those stories. You know, we needed a way to make it more about storytelling and less about history writing.
And do you think that's relevant to the way we think about memorializing those who've died of COVID-19 as well?
I would like to hope that, similar to what the quilt did, that whatever memorial there is for COVID inspires communities to come together and to not isolate. The nature of COVID, devastating nature of COVID, is this isolation. The shutdowns, the gradual reopenings, the shutdowns again. Yeah. People disappearing into hospitals and never coming back out. I mean, there's tremendous amount of loneliness and invisibility related to COVID. And I would hope that some memorial kind of teaches people that the next time around we need to do this differently.
Apparently, if I disappear for 3 or 4
that
weeks,
isolation has also kept us from holding funerals and other collective mourning rituals. So,
pandemic than he does about, hey, didn't you guys have to talk about a pipeline at some point that isn't happening now? So I wonder if we see a lot of positivity about that, just in case somebody brought up pipeline at some point.
Well, the pipeline I most worry about, and everybody in Ontario should worry about, is Enbridge Line 5, which without it, we aren't going anywhere but going into the dark without any fuel. So there are key issues, Scott, that have to be resolved between our two countries. And I think a lot of Canadians just assume because Biden is quieter that he'd be better for Canada, but he is still very much a protectionist.
Well, again, you have to remember the entire world is in a global pandemic now. So everybody has to rely on themselves. Of course, people are willing to help, but for the most part, we're seeing who is self-sufficient and who isn't self-sufficient. And let's be honest, I mean, the Prime Minister's tripping over himself because it's the only good news he's had in the last several weeks. Anything that's a distraction away from the fact that we don't have any dang vaccines. And just a few months ago, we were sitting up here north of the border and looking at our friends in the south and going, look at those people, how undignified of them. Look at the position they're in. And then all of a sudden, 0 to 100 in 3 seconds flat. and now they're leading certainly us when it comes to vaccine. So
And
again,
who got those? A guy named Donald Trump, because he spent money and he invested. So I mean, he did something right. But yeah, to your point.
The exact same thing that that Boris Johnson did in the UK. The exact same thing that Justin Trudeau did not do. Absolutely. There were many countries that were in the same predicament that Canada was. We chose a route to go with CanSino in China. It fell through. By that time, it was August. We needed to just line up and buy what we could. But, you know, there's so much of a distraction baked into this. It's unbelievable. And it's, look, over here, something shiny. Let's remove.
And security preparations resulted in the deaths of 5 people. Here's how former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund described the situation.
A clear lack of accurate and complete intelligence across several federal agencies contributed to this event, and not poor planning by the United States Capitol Police. We rely on accurate information from our federal partners to help us develop effective security plans.
3 of the 4 security officials in charge that day, including Chief Sund, resigned immediately after the attack. Senate Rules Committee Chairwoman Amy Klobuchar says the next police chief should have greater ability to make decisions both leading up to and during a crisis. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is offering a cautiously optimistic outlook for the economy's performance this year. NPR's Scott Horsley tells us Powell spoke to a Senate committee as Congress weighs President Biden's proposal.
One-on-one appointments that follow strict safety protocols. We've also updated our click and drive online shopping experience, giving you the option to shop from the comfort of home. Contact your local dealer to learn about our commitment to cleanliness and the great offers available to you.
With the Daily Grand Lotto, you could win $1,000 a day for life.
Wait, every single day?
Yeah.
So I'd start liking Mondays?
Probably.
But everybody hates Mondays. So I'd suddenly be an outcast, living on the fringes of society, a bizarre Monday-loving
An immediate threat. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington. Stocks finished mixed on Wall Street. Shares of big companies like Apple and Microsoft